After I stormed out in a revealing dress, he planned a shocking revenge for when I got home. Hello, Reddit. Using a throwaway account because I don't want this tied to my main. My name is Amelia, and for the sake of anonymity, let's call my ex-husband Mike. Mike and I were married for 3 years. It's not a super long time, but we had been together since college, so we had a good chunk of history between us. From the very start, our relationship has been solid. He's an incredible person, kind, supportive, and was always ready to put me first. Honestly, I could go on and on about all the ways Mike has been amazing over the years. Our relationship was great until I ruined it. Mike always had a bit of a hang-up about conservativeness when it came to clothing. Actually, scratch that. I wouldn't really call it a hang-up. It's more of a personal preference, a deeply ingrained part of who he is. He's the kind of guy who thinks modesty has a certain elegance to it, that a well-cut dress that leaves something to the imagination is far more attractive than something that leaves it all out in the open. To be fair, it's not like Mike has ever been a jerk about his preferences. He doesn't go around lecturing people about what they should or shouldn't wear, and he certainly doesn't glare at strangers in revealing outfits or act like he's morally superior to anyone who dresses differently. It's just his personal taste, plain and simple. He gravitates toward looks that are classy and timeless. Think Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's. Elegant dresses. He's never been into flashy or overly revealing styles, but that's just who he is. When we first started dating, I actually found it kind of sweet. There was something refreshing about the way he carried himself. He wasn't one of those guys with wandering eyes, the kind that always seemed distracted by every short skirt or plunging neckline in the room. With Mike, I never felt like I had to compete with every other woman in his line of sight. When he looked at me, it felt like he really saw me, not just my body or the clothes I was wearing, but me. And when he complimented me on an outfit, oh, it was the kind of compliment that stayed with you. That being said, I've never exactly been the poster child for conservative fashion myself. I wouldn't call my style bold or risque, but I've always enjoyed adding a little flair to my outfits. Bright colors, fun accessories, a hint of edge here and there. I like expressing myself through what I wear. It's not like I walk around in anything too revealing, but I'm definitely not rocking floor-length cardigans and turtlenecks every day either. I've always struck a balance, enough to feel confident and stylish, but nothing so extreme it would raise eyebrows. And honestly, I never saw it as a big deal, and neither did Mike. At least not in the beginning. Back then, he didn't bat an eye at my wardrobe choices. If anything, he seemed to appreciate my sense of style, even if it wasn't always aligned with his preferences. That all changed when I met a group of people I now deeply regret meeting. It started innocently enough. We met at my workplace, and we quickly became friends. Our field is overwhelmingly male-dominated. There weren't a lot of women around, so naturally we gravitated toward each other. It was like an unspoken rule. We were the minority, so we had to stick together. That made us bond fast, and before I knew it, we were spending more and more time together outside of work. Looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs early on. Their personalities were superficial, to put it lightly, but at the time I didn't really care. I think I was just happy to have friends, other women I could talk to and share things with. I'd never been the type to have a big girl gang growing up, so this was new and exciting for me. I wanted to belong, and they offered me that. We started hanging out a lot, doing the typical girls' night out stuff, shopping trips, brunches, and of course clubbing. At first it was fun. They were lively, full of energy, and knew how to have a good time. But over time, I began to notice a pattern. It usually started with small things like outfits. Whenever we were going out, the conversation would always shift to what we were wearing. Anytime I picked an outfit, there was always some kind of comment. It was never outright mean, but it always carried a subtle undertone of disapproval. They'd say things like, "Oh, my dress was too long," or "my look was too conservative." It was like I wasn't daring enough for them. At first, I thought it was actually kind of cool. I mean, who doesn't want to have a group of friends to hang out with, right? Friends that care about you, give you advice, and, encourage you to step outside your comfort zone. I was loving the attention and the fun nights out. It was new, it was exciting, and I felt like I was part of something for the first time in a while. Then they started influencing me in ways that I didn't even realize at first. I mean, I always prided myself on having my own style, but then came the pressure. The constant push to wear things I never thought I'd go for, dresses with shorter hems, tops with plunging necklines. I started buying clothes I never would have even looked twice at before. They'd push me to wear outfits that I wasn't comfortable in, telling me I needed to show off what I've got, or stop dressing like a grandma. And I guess I started listening to them, thinking maybe I was too uptight, or I was missing out on something. But that wasn't the worst of it. Then came the makeup. I've always been a more natural kind of girl, just a little mascara, some lip gloss, and I'm good to go. But with them, I started doing the full-on glam, contouring, heavy eyeliner, the works. It felt way too much for me, but I thought, hey, if they can pull it off, maybe I can too. So I went along with it, putting on layers of makeup that made me feel more like a doll than a person. I didn't even recognize myself in the mirror sometimes. And then there was the whole going out thing. It started out innocent enough, just grabbing drinks after work or going to a party here and there. But then it became every weekend, and sometimes even on weeknights. I would agree to go out even when I knew we had work the next day, even when I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. I didn't want to be the boring one, the one who bailed early or didn't want to go out. So I'd drag myself out, throw on the dress they told me to wear, put on the over-the-top makeup, and pretend like I was having the time of my life. It didn't matter that I was getting 4 hours of sleep and dragging through the next day at work. I just didn't want to be seen as someone who wasn't fun or cool enough to keep up. And I mean, it worked. They seemed to approve, and you know what? I felt like I was fitting in with them, like I was finally part of the crowd, and that was something I'd always wanted. It felt so damn good to be accepted, to be the girl everyone noticed. The compliments, the attention, it was like a drug. I loved how they'd tell me how amazing I looked, how I was turning heads everywhere I went. It was like a boost to my ego I hadn't realized I needed. For a minute, I felt like I was living a life I'd been missing out on for so long, like I was finally the girl who could be the center of attention, the one everyone admired. At first, the change was shocking. I mean, I was used to being relatively low-key, But once I started getting all that attention, it became addictive. People would stare, compliment me on my outfits, ask where I got my dresses, tell me I looked like I belonged on a runway. And every time I heard that, I couldn't help but feel a little rush of excitement, like maybe I had been missing out on something all this time. The girl I was before, the more modest and reserved one, seemed so far removed from the version I was becoming, but for some reason, I liked this new version of me. It felt good. Mike started noticing it too. I could see it in his eyes, the way he'd look at me, like something was off. He didn't say anything at first, but I could tell he was confused, or maybe even hurt by the changes. It wasn't just the way I was dressing or the late nights out. It was the fact that I wasn't me anymore, and I think he felt that shift before I even did. But instead of confronting it directly, I just kept going, telling myself it was no big deal. He'd adjust, right? He'd get used to it. So when I started talking to my friends about how I was feeling, about how Mike was acting distant or confused, they were quick to tell me exactly what I wanted to hear. He's just trying to control you, they'd say. He's not comfortable with the new you, and that's his problem. He'll adapt. And I wanted to believe them. I needed to believe them, because the alternative was admitting that maybe I was losing myself in the process, that maybe the life I was chasing wasn't even what I really wanted. But instead of listening to my gut, I fed into their lies. I let them tell me that Mike was the problem, not me. I let them convince me that my need for attention, for validation, wasn't something to be ashamed of, that it was something to embrace. Looking back, I hate to admit it, but I was like a lamb being fattened for slaughter. They fed me these ideas, these lies, and I swallowed them whole without a second thought. It was like I couldn't see the trap I was walking into. I kept thinking I was just having fun, enjoying life. Eventually, things came to a head. Mike couldn't hold back anymore, and he started talking about it. He started telling me how he was worried about the way things were changing, how my outfits were getting more revealing, how I was going out more and leaving him behind. At first, I just brushed it off. By then, I'd been so heavily indoctrinated by my friends that anything Mike said to me about it went straight in one ear and out the other. I honestly didn't want to hear it. I had been convinced by them that he was just trying to control me. So when Mike brought it up, I didn't even give it a second thought. I just shut him down, telling him that he was the problem, not me. That he was the one overthinking things, overly sexualizing everything. I repeated all the things my friends had said to me like a script, telling him he was too conservative, too old-fashioned, that he didn't get how things were now. I basically parroted their words back to him. Every time Mike tried to express his concern or share how he was feeling, I shot him down, shut him out. I didn't care about how he felt anymore, or at least I didn't want to face it. I just wanted to keep being the girl my friends had helped me become, the one who could be the center of attention, the one who could do whatever she wanted without any consequences. Of course, everything came to a head eventually. The tipping point was my friend's birthday party. It was at a club, naturally, because that was where we always hung out. We'd been planning it for weeks, and she was beyond excited about it. We'd all coordinated our outfits in advance. Yes, we'd actually planned to match in a way, because, girls and aesthetics. It felt like a big deal, and missing it wasn't even an option in my mind. I mean, she was my friend, and I couldn't let her down, right? But that night turned into a disaster before I even left the house. Mike and I got into one of the worst arguments we'd ever had. I'd come out of the bedroom in the dress I'd picked for the party. I thought I looked great, but when Mike saw it, he was furious. He told me flat out that he didn't want me going out like that it was too revealing, and that I was practically leaving nothing for the imagination. I tried to explain that it wasn't just about me, that my friends and I had planned these outfits together. It was coordinated. We wanted to match, and I didn't want to ruin the vibe or stand out by changing into something else. I thought he'd understand that, but he didn't. He kept saying that it didn't matter what my friends were doing, that he didn't want me going out dressed like that. It spiraled from there. He said it wasn't just about the dress. It was about how I'd been acting lately, how I'd changed, how I was prioritizing these shallow friendships over our marriage. And me? I wasn't having it. I snapped right back, throwing every accusation I could think of at him. I told him he was just being controlling, that he didn't trust me, that he was acting like some old-fashioned prude who wanted to keep me locked up at home. I didn't hold back. I threw out every yada, yada, yada line my friends had fed me over the past few months, all those things about how he'd adapt and get over it if I just stuck to my guns. The argument went nowhere. Neither of us was backing down, and the tension in the room was suffocating. Meanwhile, my phone kept buzzing with messages from my friends, who were already waiting for me outside. I was running out of time, so in the heat of the moment, I made a choice. I grabbed my bag, stormed out of the house, and left Mike. He told me not to go. He begged me not to walk out that door in that dress. But I didn't listen. I slammed the door behind me and headed out to the party, convinced that I was in the right, that I was standing up for myself. I didn't know it then, but that choice would come back to bite me harder than I ever could have imagined. We got to the club, and I'll admit, it was fun at first. The music was good, the drinks were flowing, and my friends were hyping each other up like it was the best night ever. But deep down, I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. It started as a little knot in my stomach, but it kept growing. I kept thinking about Mike, about the fight we'd had, and wondering if I'd gone too far this time. Honestly, there was a moment when I wanted to leave and just go back home. I wish I had. I really wish I had. But my friends, of course, weren't having it. They reassured me, told me I was overthinking it, and insisted that by the time I got back, Mike would have calmed down. They told me we'd talk it out like adults, and everything would be fine. They said he was just overreacting, that I was letting him get in my head, and I stupidly let their words convince me. So I pushed the unease aside and forced myself to enjoy the night. We partied harder than I'd planned. Drinks kept coming, and before I knew it, we were all buzzed out of our minds. Nobody wanted to drive in that state, which, okay, fair. So we found a nearby hotel and decided to crash there for the night. It wasn't a workday the next day, so it seemed harmless enough. We laughed about it, brushed it off like it was no big deal, and went to sleep, totally oblivious to the storm waiting for me back home. The next morning, we woke up, got ourselves together, and headed out. My friends dropped me off at the house, and the second I stepped out of the car, something felt off. You know that gut feeling you get when something's not right? Yeah, that hit me like a truck. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but it was there, gnawing at me. When I got inside, the realization didn't hit me immediately. The house looked the same at a glance, but as I walked around, I started noticing it. His stuff was gone. Not all of it, but enough for me to know something was very, very wrong. His clothes weren't in the closet. His favorite mug wasn't in the kitchen. Piece by piece, it hit me. He had moved out. I lost it. I started freaking out, full-blown panic mode. My hands were shaking as I tried calling him. Over and over I called, but he didn't pick up. I didn't know what to do, so I called everyone I could think of. His friends, his coworkers, anyone who might know where he was. Eventually his mom answered. She was the one to fill me in. She told me he was done. Done with my disrespect. I begged her to help me, to talk to him, to get him to come back, but she wouldn't budge. She even told me I needed to leave him alone. Leave him alone? He's my husband. How was I supposed to just leave him alone? Eventually, he texted me, warned me to stop calling or he'd block me. That broke me. I even collapsed on the couch, sobbing until my body physically couldn't take it anymore. My head was pounding from crying so much, and eventually I just passed out. Days passed, then weeks. He didn't call. He didn't reply to my messages. It was like he'd vanished. I didn't hear from him for 2 weeks. Then out of the blue, he showed up. He came with a couple of his friends, and they were to grab the rest of his stuff and hand me divorce papers. The second I saw those papers, I broke. I made a scene, a full-on meltdown. I begged him to talk to me, to explain, to give me a chance to fix things. At first, he wasn't interested. He was cold and distant. But eventually, after what felt like an eternity of pleading, he agreed to sit down and talk. We sat down and I poured my heart out. I begged Mike to give me another chance, told him how sorry I was, promised I'd change, that I'd do whatever it took to fix things. I said everything I could think of, every apology I could muster, but none of it moved him. He told me that he wasn't interested. He said he was done, completely done, and that there was no going back. He told me he'd been patient for far too long, and that my behavior had been disrespectful from the moment I met my friends. He said he'd tried to reason with me, to talk things out, but I had never listened. And now for him, it was too late. We talked for what felt like hours, going in circles. I cried, pleaded, and apologized again and again, but nothing I said seemed to matter. He didn't budge. He begged me to just sign the divorce papers and leave him alone. His voice wasn't angry. It was exhausted, like he didn't even have the energy to argue anymore. Eventually, I gave up. I couldn't force him to stay. He left with his friends, taking the rest of his things, and as the door closed behind him, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I was heartbroken. After that, everything in my life crumbled. My performance at work went down the drain. I couldn't focus on anything. Every time I sat at my desk, all I could think about was how I had ruined my marriage, how I had destroyed my life. I started avoiding my so-called friends, those horrible, toxic people who had pushed me into this mess. I thought maybe they'd reach out to check on me, but of course they didn't. Not a single one of them. I know they heard what happened. Bad news travels fast. But they didn't care. They avoided me just as much as I avoided them. Fake friends, every single one of them. And then there was the financial side of things. I couldn't even afford an apartment on my own. Mike had been the breadwinner, and without him, everything was glaringly clear. I didn't just lose my husband. I lost my stability, my sense of security, and my entire support system. Even my own parents refused to help me. When they found out why Mike had left me, they were heartbroken and furious. They're devout Catholics, and my behavior didn't just disappoint them, it embarrassed them. They made it clear that I had brought this on myself. No financial help, no emotional support, no physical assistance, nothing. I knew I was wrong. I knew I had messed up in the worst way possible, but still, their coldness broke me even further. I was in such a horrible place, completely alone. Everyone thought I deserved what I got, and maybe I did. but that didn't make it hurt any less. I had no support, literally nowhere. Not at work, not with friends, not even at home. My so-called friends weren't just fake. They were absolutely horrible people. They turned against me so quickly it made my head spin. It wasn't enough for them to just ignore me. No, they had to actively spread rumors about me. And not just any rumors. Horrible, vile, gut-wrenching lies. They started saying I had been cheating on my husband at the clubs we used to go to. They claimed I was constantly sneaking around, that I even tried to drag them into my so-called escapades, coercing them to cheat too. Then they had the audacity to go even further and say I was a drug addict. Like, what the actual fuck? It wasn't just personal anymore. These rumors made their way into the workplace. Suddenly, everyone was whispering about me. People were staring, laughing behind my back, and making me feel like an absolute pariah. I reported it to HR so many times, but it was all for nothing. They couldn't find substantial evidence to prove who was spreading the rumors, so the entire situation was just swept under the rug. I was stuck in that toxic, suffocating environment, and I couldn't leave because I needed the money. Plus, I knew quitting would mean getting barely any severance pay, so I clung to that job for a while longer because I had no other choice. But eventually, it became unbearable. The divorce was finalized around the same time, and that was just the cherry on top of my downward spiral. Once the divorce was official, my world completely crumbled. I was depressed beyond words. I couldn't get out of bed most days, couldn't even think straight. I had to move out of the apartment Mike and I had shared because, of course, I couldn't afford it on my own. He had always been the breadwinner, and without him, I had nothing. I ended up moving into this tiny, barely livable apartment, and honestly, it felt like the walls were closing in on me. I'd sit there for hours, staring at the peeling paint, wondering how the hell my life had come to this. I was a shell of the person I used to be. The sadness, the anger, the regret. It was all consuming. Eventually, I couldn't take the work environment anymore. It was destroying me just as much as everything else, so I quit. The severance pay I got was laughable, barely enough to cover the basics. With no other options, I turned to freelancing. At first, I thought it would be my saving grace. I could work on my own terms and rebuild my life little by little. But freelancing isn't as glamorous as people make it out to be. It's hard. Really fucking hard. Most months, I'm barely scraping by. I live from hand to mouth, juggling bills and praying I can make rent on time. Some weeks, I don't even know how I'm going to eat. It's like this constant, suffocating weight on my chest that never goes away. Now, I'm starting to realize freelancing alone won't sustain me. I need something more stable, at least part-time, to support myself while I figure things out. I've been half-heartedly job searching, but I haven't fully committed yet. Maybe it's the fear of failing again, or maybe I just don't know where to start anymore. This life? This isn't what I imagined for myself. I lost everything. I destroyed my marriage, my stability, my reputation, everything. I have no one to blame but myself. So why am I even posting this here? For support? For pity? To get torn apart by strangers? Honestly, I don't even know. Maybe I just need to scream into the void and hope that someone, anyone, understands how it feels to completely ruin your own life and be left with nothing but the wreckage. I'll never forgive myself, not for what I did, not for how I let things spiral, and definitely not for losing him. I can't stop thinking about how different things would be if I had just listened to him, if I had just swallowed my pride, if I had just stayed home that night instead of going out. But I didn't, and now I'm here, alone, wallowing in regret and sadness while he seems to have moved on so effortlessly. It's like I was just a chapter he decided to close, and he's already started writing a new one. I'll never forget him. How could I? He wasn't just my husband. He was my best friend, my rock, the person who knew me better than anyone else. And I threw it all away. And those so-called friends of mine, those fake, backstabbing, cowardly pieces of shit, I hope karma catches up with them. I hope they feel every ounce of pain they made me feel. They didn't just abandon me when I needed them most. They turned on me. They destroyed what little dignity I had left, distributed lies, tore me down at work, and isolated me even more. I don't even know how to describe how I feel anymore. Heartbroken doesn't seem like enough. Depressed? Sure. Sad? Absolutely. But it's deeper than that. It's like this crushing, relentless weight on my chest that I can't escape. Every morning, I wake up hoping it'll feel lighter, but it never does. And the worst part? I'm still in love with him. I still miss him so much it physically hurts. Every time I see something that reminds me of him, his favorite song, a movie we used to watch together, even the smell of his cologne, it's like a knife to the heart. I don't know if I'll ever stop loving him. I don't know if I'll ever be able to move on like he has. I wish I could turn back time, but I can't. So don't be like me, I guess. Don't take the people who love you for granted. Don't make the mistake of thinking someone will stick around forever, no matter how much you push them away. Because they won't. People have limits. Love has limits. And when it's gone, it's gone. No amount of apologies, tears, or sleepless nights spent begging for forgiveness can bring it back. Trust me, I've tried. Don't think you'll have time to fix it later either. Don't assume the other person will just get over it, or that they'll wait for you to come around. Life doesn't work like that. People don't work like that. I learned that the hard way. If you're reading this and you're on the verge of making a choice, you know deep down you'll regret. Don't do it. If you're in the middle of an argument with someone you care about, and you know you're being unfair, stop, swallow your pride, apologize, fix it before it's too late. Because once it's gone, and trust me, there's no worse feeling in the world than knowing you had it all and threw it away. Don't be like me.